Karen mocked a firefighter's accent. His story got national praise. The roar of the fire truck was deafening, a symphony of chaos that echoed through the quiet suburban street. Penelope Penny Harrington stood on her manicured lawn, the manicured lawn that was now threatened by the angry orange flames licking at the side of her McMansion. Panic, a sensation as foreign to her as a mismatched throw pillow, clawed at her throat. Penny was, in a word, the epitome of privilege. She was the president of the local HOA, a regular at charity galas, and the proud owner of a closet filled with designer clothes. Her life was a carefully constructed tableau of perfection, and any deviation from that was met with swift and decisive action. She was not, to put it mildly, accustomed to things going wrong. The fire had started in the kitchen, a rogue spark from a faulty espresso machine, a brand she would absolutely be complaining about on her lifestyle blog, The Polished Life. It had spread with terrifying speed, consuming her carefully curated culinary space and threatening to engulf the entire house. The firefighters arrived like heroes from a gritty, working-class movie, a stark contrast to the perfectly sculpted lives in her neighborhood. Leading the charge was a man named Jake, tall and broad-shouldered, with soot smudged on his face and an accent as thick as molasses in January. He barked orders to his crew, his voice a deep rumble that resonated with authority. Penny, still reeling from the shock of her perfect world crumbling around her, watched Jake with a mixture of fear and disdain. His accent, a far cry from the polished diction of her social circle, grated on her ears. It was a reminder of a world she rarely acknowledged, a world that existed outside the manicured lawns and gated communities of her existence. Jake and his crew worked tirelessly, battling the blaze with a skill and determination that Penny, in her state of distress, couldn't help but grudgingly admire. He moved with a focused intensity, his movements efficient and precise. He was clearly in charge, a natural leader in this chaotic situation. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the fire was extinguished. The relief that washed over Penny was immense, but it was quickly followed by a wave of irritation. Her kitchen was ruined, her house smelled of smoke, and she had had to deal with those people. Jake approached Penny, his face still smudged with soot, his eyes tired but triumphant. "Ma'am, the fire's out. We managed to contain it to the kitchen, but there's significant damage. You're lucky we got here when we did." Penny, still caught in the throes of her own self-absorption, barely registered the gratitude she should have felt. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly as she focused on Jake's accent. It was so pronounced. "Yes, well, thank you," she said, her tone cool and dismissive. "I suppose you did." "All right." She couldn't resist adding a little dig. "It's a shame about my kitchen, though. All that imported Italian marble, ruined. And I specifically told the contractor." She trailed off, shaking her head in exasperation. Jake, who had dealt with his fair share of difficult people in his career, simply nodded. He was used to it. People, especially those from the wealthier parts of town, often looked down on firefighters. They saw them as blue-collar heroes, but heroes nonetheless beneath their social standing. He'd learned to let it slide, most of the time. But Penny wasn't done. Emboldened by his silence, she continued. "I mean, really, that accent, it's so unrefined. It's hard to understand what you're saying half the time. Don't they have elocution lessons for firefighters?" She tittered, a high-pitched, brittle sound that grated on Jake's already frayed nerves. Jake froze. His jaw tightened, and his eyes, which had been filled with the satisfaction of a job well done, hardened. He stared at Penny for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The other firefighters, who had been packing up their equipment, stopped what they were doing and turned to watch the exchange. An uncomfortable silence settled over the scene, broken only by the occasional hiss of steam from the fire hoses. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I just saved your house. My unrefined accent didn't seem to bother you when your house was burning down. And for your information, I'm proud of where I come from and how I speak. It's part of who I am." He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "But since you're so concerned about my elocution, let me tell you a story about a fire, a lot like this one, a few years back. Only this one was a lot worse. Penny, for the first time, seemed to realize that she might have crossed a line. She shifted uncomfortably, her carefully constructed facade of composure beginning to crack. But she was too stubborn, too entrenched in her own sense of superiority, to back down. "A story?" she asked, her voice still laced with condescension. "I'm sure it's very interesting." Jake ignored the sarcasm. He wasn't telling the story for her benefit. He was telling it for himself, for his crew, for anyone who had ever been made to feel less than because of where they came from or how they spoke. "It was a house fire," he began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "A family was trapped inside. A mother, a father, and two young children. The house was engulfed in flames, and we didn't have much time. I was the first one in, crawling through the smoke, trying to find them." He paused, his eyes clouding over with the memory. "I found the children first, huddled in a back bedroom. They were terrified, choking on the smoke. I grabbed them, one under each arm, and started to carry them out. That's when the floor collapsed." Penny's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, she was actually listening. The bravado in her voice was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine interest. "I fell," Jake continued, his voice flat. "Fell through the floor, into the basement. The children, they were thrown clear, thank God. But I was trapped. The fire was spreading, the smoke was thick, and I couldn't see anything. My radio was busted, and nobody knew where I was." He took a deep breath, the memory clearly painful. "I was starting to lose hope. I thought I was going to die there, in that burning basement. Then I heard a voice calling my name. It was one of my guys, another firefighter. He had heard me fall, and he was searching for me. He found me," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "He pulled me out of that basement, just moments before the whole house collapsed. He saved my life." He looked directly at Penny, his gaze intense. "That firefighter, the one who saved me, he had the same accent I do. He grew up in the same town, spoke the same way. If he hadn't been there, if he hadn't understood my call for help, I wouldn't be standing here today." Penny stared at Jake, her face pale. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking suddenly old and fragile. The weight of her words, the sheer magnitude of her callousness, finally crashed down upon her. "I," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know." "No, ma'am, you didn't," Jake said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You saw my accent, and you made a judgment. You assumed I was less educated, less refined, less worthy than you. You didn't see the man who just saved your house. You didn't see the years of training, the countless lives saved, the sacrifices made. You just saw an accent." He paused, letting his words sink in. "My accent tells a story, ma'am. It tells a story of where I come from, of the people I love, of the values I hold dear. It's a story of hard work, of dedication, of courage. It's a story I'm proud of." He turned to his crew, who stood silently by, their faces a mixture of pride and respect. "We all have stories," he said, his voice ringing out. "Every one of us. And those stories deserve to be heard, regardless of how we tell them." He turned back to Penny, his expression softening slightly. "I'm not asking you to like my accent, ma'am, but I am asking you to respect it, and to respect the people who speak it, because one day that unrefined voice might be the one that saves your life." With that, he turned and walked away, joining his crew as they began to pack up their equipment. The other firefighters, their faces grim, followed him, casting sidelong glances at Penny as they passed. Penny stood alone in her ravaged yard, the acrid smell of smoke stinging her nostrils. The reality of her own prejudice, the sheer ugliness of her words, hung heavy in the air. She had been so quick to judge, so eager to dismiss, so blinded by her own sense of superiority that she had completely disregarded the humanity of the man who had just saved her home. The following days were a nightmare for Penny. The insurance adjusters were difficult, the contractors were unreliable, and the repairs to her house were taking far longer and costing far more than she had anticipated. But these inconveniences paled in comparison to the firestorm that was brewing in the media. One of the firefighters, a young recruit who had witnessed the exchange between Penny and Jake, had been so disgusted by her behavior that he had written about it on his social media page. His post, detailing Penny's callous remarks and Jake's powerful response, had gone viral. The internet, as it often does, exploded. Penny was vilified, her words dissected and condemned by thousands of people from all walks of life. She was labeled a racist, a snob, and everything in between. Her carefully constructed online persona, the polished life, became a target of ridicule and scorn. Then, the news picked up the story. Jake, the unassuming firefighter with the unrefined accent, was interviewed on national television. He recounted the story of the fire, his voice humble and moving. He spoke of his fellow firefighters, their bravery, their dedication, their unwavering commitment to serving their community. He never mentioned Penny by name, but his message was clear. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of their background or how they speak. The interview went viral. Jake became a national hero, a symbol of working-class courage and dignity. Offers poured in, book deals, speaking engagements, even a possible reality show. Jake, however, turned them all down. He was a firefighter, not a celebrity. He just wanted to get back to work, to the job he loved, the job he was proud of. Penny, on the other hand, became a pariah. She was ostracized by her community, her friends distancing themselves from her as quickly as possible. Her social calendar, once overflowing with galas and parties, was now empty. Her blog, The Polished Life, was flooded with negative comments, forcing her to shut it down. The backlash was swift and brutal. Penny lost sponsorships, endorsements, and even her position on the HOA board. Her life, once a picture of perfection, was now a smoldering ruin, much like her kitchen. The experience was a harsh awakening for Penny. For the first time in her life, she was forced to confront the reality of her own prejudice, the ugliness that had been lurking beneath the surface of her carefully constructed world. She had always thought of herself as a good person, a tolerant person, but the fire and the aftermath had revealed a darker truth. She was ashamed, deeply, profoundly ashamed. She had been so quick to judge, so eager to dismiss, so blinded by her own privilege that she had completely disregarded the humanity of another person. And in doing so, she had destroyed her own life. In the aftermath of the media storm, Penny retreated from public life. She sold her McMansion, at a loss, of course, and moved to a small apartment in a more diverse neighborhood. She started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, working alongside people from all walks of life. She enrolled in a diversity training program, determined to confront her own biases and learn to be a better person. The change was slow and painful. Penny had to unlearn years of ingrained thinking, to confront the uncomfortable truths about herself, and to make amends for the harm she had caused. She reached out to Jake, writing him a long, heartfelt letter of apology. She didn't expect forgiveness, but she hoped that he would understand the depth of her remorse. Jake, being the man he was, eventually responded. His letter was kind but firm. He acknowledged her apology, but he also made it clear that her words had hurt him and his fellow firefighters. He urged her to continue her journey of self-discovery, to use her experience to educate others, and to become an advocate for understanding and respect. Penny took his words to heart. She became an outspoken advocate for diversity and inclusion, speaking at community events and sharing her story with anyone who would listen. She used her platform, however diminished it was, to promote empathy and understanding. Years passed. Penny was no longer the woman of privilege and prejudice, the woman who had lived in a bubble of ignorance. She became a woman of humility and compassion, a woman who was committed to making the world a more just and equitable place. And it all started with a firefighter with an unrefined accent, and a moment of profound and painful self-reflection.